Yo dog, Kenny Boucher here, Next Level Painting, hitting you up on the literal best of all days. Coming to you from the Beats Lab in Hollywood, we're doing it again. Today, we're gonna be batch painting vehicles, right? It's kind of boring, but it's a necessary element of creating an army, right? We're getting ready to get back in the season, hopefully. And we're gonna be having to make our 2,000 point armies again. So there's a lot of techniques for batch painting big box tanks, especially those marine style vehicles, to get them on the table quick while not breaking your back on time investment. Anyway, let's do this thing. I'm showing you guys the end of the video at the beginning of the video because I'm a marketing genius. 3 Plagueburst crawlers locked and loaded, ready to go for my 2,000 point deathguard army. Today, I'm going to be showing you guys the system I use to batch paint multiple box tanks for your army, getting it done quick and consistently while deploying some weathering effects. So right out the gate, here they are. We locked in a nice primer. We've got some elements left off. Subassembly is going to be your friend when you're doing batch painting. Yo, if you could throw some magnets on some of these sponsons, keep the Dozer blade off, even these like spines that go up on the side, all that. Now I do have this new primer, Monument Hobbies, that Pro Acro. This is a black brown, which is interesting because black brown is actually the first color in my workup for the deathguard army we've been using. So that saved a lot of time to prime that with the airbrush. Now I'm going to show you guys something in an order that may surprise you. So we're just loading up some dark silver in the airbrush. When you have vehicles like this, sometimes it behooves you to go in and just spray down a bunch of the metals, shove it into the nooks and crannies, get it out of the way. It isn't that hard to wipe out overspray later. But if you can just jam the dark metal into the deepest nooks and crannies, that means you don't have to use a big ass paintbrush later to try to jam it all in there. This is a time saver, especially since we were able to deploy a color match primer from Monument Hobbies, one of my favorite companies. Obviously, you guys see me using their paints a lot in my videos. So we're just going to go through, stay consistent. We're using minimum thinness necessary to facilitate smooth airbrushing as a base coat. By no means is it just like chunky and opaque. All my paint gets thinned at least a little bit with some flow improver, maybe some water. But we're doing absolutely a little bit more on the opaque side. Okay, look, you get all that silver done. It's going to dry pretty quick. Rinse the brush out, get the metallics out, do a quick hobo fling, rinse. And now let's go back to that black brown. So now we're going to load the black brown back up. Again, minimum thinness necessary to facilitate smooth airbrushing. This is a base coat, and we're just going to kind of repaint our primer black brown. It's a pretty close color match. I think the primer is actually a little darker, which I like that. It lets me budget a little bit more real estate for drama and shadows. But my primary goal is to give a nice coat of acrylic paint to this polyurethane primer and generate some consistency, while my secondary goal is to wipe out the overspray of the dark silver. And you see, we've already got it done. Imagine like going in there and paintbrushing all that in there. You might have tried to subassemble it even. But at the end of the day, this saves a shitload of time. Any good batch painting, especially a 101 next level painting workup, is going to use the airbrush to kickstart the thing. Back to business, guys. We're going to do our workup. This has been the same workup we used on our Plague Marine 101 batch painting video, our Mortarion Epic tutorial. And again now, this is the consistency. We're using bright yellow green, mixing it into our black brown. Okay, the black brown is very dark. It's like our dark value, our shader. And we're introducing like this nice bright hue into it, but incrementally. You always want to respect the journey, at least on the value scale, like how dark something is to how bright something is. So I don't just jump straight to the bright yellow green. They're gonna be married together. This is the fuzziness. Generating flawless transitions is about 2 major things in my school of thought. One of them is respect. Don't just jump up the ladder in how bright something is too quick. Secondly, and possibly just as important, is your opacity level. Painting is just 2 things for me: opacity and moisture management. The airbrush is really good at lowering the opacity and managing the moisture through trigger control techniques. And so what we did on these box tanks is we just focused on some basic transitions outside of the tracks, center mass. Real simple. Okay, that's sitting there and that's drying. Let's stay busy in the Beats Lab, guys. Let's pull the old airbrush back out. Let's reset. Let's get some bright yellow, green, and brown back in the pot. But this time it's a lot more of the green. Therefore, it's brighter. So we're gonna just kind of use the same formula and just keep brightening it, raising it up incrementally. Like you can have 3 paints, typically people do, a dark color, a mid-tone, and a bright color. But it doesn't just mean it's 3 passes with the airbrush. It's as many passes as it takes to get it done, okay? Especially if you're trying to channel like flawless, beautiful transitions with no spider webbing, no speckling, right? As long as you respect the journey and you build opacity into your paint, you're gonna be fine. So we're doing it again. We're gonna reinforce all the highlights we just did, adding to them, augmenting to them. But this pass, it's very low opacity. As I generate more and more highlights, especially on bigger, flatter surfaces, I really do lower the opacity substantially. I usually use just water. Once I get my flow improver in the pot, that's pretty much all I care about. And then it's just water from there. And these passes are progressively lower and lower opacity. Therefore, they're having like slightly less impact per pass, but it lets me kind of push into the real estate, manipulate it, link things together. It also heavily mitigates the fail rate of speckling. And as you can see, we have a beautiful beginning to this transition. We're going to now begin adding our final brightest value to our mix. And it's bright warm gray. It's in my school of thought as an airbrush artist, I try to think like we're mixing in real time. We're trying to create very, artistic solutions to how things are dark, how things are bright, without just always using blacks and whites and things like that. So the black brown is my creative solution to a nice dark value in the beginning of the paint job. And the bright warm gray is a very fun solution to making highlights. And it really does interact well with these greens and these browns, right? It's a very traditional deathguard-esque color with a little bit of excitement built in with the yellowness in that green and a nice traditional, just like straight, like almost desaturated highlight. So again, it's just out perimeter, the spikes, the spines, center mass, very low opacity. I like to tell people, however thin you're used to painting, I want you to get a little bit more uncomfortable than that. However much water you use, get yourself a little bit more uncomfortable. Okay, now that you're uncomfortable in the next pass, take that uncomfortability and push another percentage point to uncomfortableness. That's a hard word to say. I'm not a languager. And we're just building again, augmenting, never invalidating. We're always leaving real estate behind so you can see that sexy transition. Okay, there's a lot to a transition, how much of each like stage you leave intact. I call that the real estate. Here I'm keeping it kind of simple. Nice dark real estate, moving into a mid-tone, moving into a nice aggressive highlight. And again, it's not just 3 colors, 3 passes. It's as many passes as it takes to generate the opacity that you envision. And it's really easy to think something looks perfectly finished when it's wet. And then when it dries, you see it's not. So when you're batch painting, it's actually kind of easy to go through them all, stay in your tempo, and then see the first one's totally dry now, and you see like, oh, I need to ramp it up. So now I'm ramping it up. Put a drop of that bright warm gray in there, go a little bit brighter, and as always, lower the opacity, add more moisture. Stay in control by using the trigger on your brush, getting good at it, getting the reps. Some airbrushes have a nice little throttler built in. That helps get close, that helps with accuracy, but at the end of the day, you can do this without such a tool. Just stay committed, stay patient. It's easy to fall victim to airbrush laziness. Happens to me all the time, or at least it used to when I was, commissioning, doing a lot of armies. You'd find like a really good workup, something simple that really gives you a good effect, and you kind of cut too many corners. So find something on the model, like the guns, the weapons, and do some stuff that you normally wouldn't do. And that way there's these cool little accents that don't really take that long, especially if you're tactical about the order of operations. Let's go on a side quest, guys, while our paints are drying on those tanks. Oftentimes right after an airbrush, I'll throw a varnish down, let it dry for a while. So in the meantime, I'm gonna tackle these plague spitters. So I'm gonna just kind of paint these canisters white real quick, or a light gray, load up the airbrush with some yellow and just start laying some yellow down. This is how I get that yellow bright. I've taken the creative liberty to basically assume these canisters are like a fucked up glass, even though I think they're just like brass or something. It's just gonna be fun, create a little bit of intrigue in the model. I'm going to do all the weapons at some point, the entropy cannons as well, but for now this is kind of a fun workup. We get a twofer. So now that we have a nice bright yellow, I'm just going to generate a quick top-down transition going backwards. You know, the orange is a little darker than the yellow, so I'm going to just kind of create a shadow per se from the top down. Okay, let's throw a little red in there, which also makes it darker. Let's respect the journey, split the diff, lower the opacity, and let's generate some more shadow. Because I'm going to be trying to create a bit of a, you know, sustainable, quick liquid vial effect here. Because I've got so many of these plague spitters. I got 6 sets of them. So just a real quick kind of fiery transition where the yellow's really bright. We got some nice dark reds and oranges, super easy. Now, once all that's done, I'm going to take some black paint, lay it on kind of thick, lay it on kind of opaque, and just kind of black out the tops of these. Try to create somewhat of a horizon line that is somewhat, you know, parallel to each other. Like you kind of want to assume that this is the liquid in there and they should be at the same level, right? It's kind of hard to do because the weapons move around and stuff, but it's a basic effect that's not really the make or break of the model. It's just fun to do. It creates a little intrigue. Real quick, let's just get some of that same black, throw a little white, maybe a little blue in the mix, create a quick little shadow line. You want to create kind of like a border between the black and the orange liquid. You want to throw a quick little highlight at the top, maybe a couple quick fake vertical slashes to kind of accept the fact that this is a liquid inside of a piece of glass. Super simple effect. We're not really going to kill ourselves doing it. We're just creating a fun effect that if you looked at the side of my tank and you saw my plague spitters, you'd be like, oh, that's sick, dude. And again, we're just going to generate a quick crisper highlight. It's important that the top of the liquid is a little shinier. So right into black, we're just going to create a little bit more shine there. And since a lot of these same colors that we're throwing in the black part of the vial are also what I'm doing in the tubes, I can kind of just go back and forth between the rubber tubes and generate some highlights there. And all this is just because, like I said, my vehicles have a varnish on them. I let it dry overnight. So I'm just going to take my time and make all these plague spitters really fucking cool. Sometimes I like to slack on the weapons, but on my personal army, I ain't going to be fucking around. I want it to look really cool. So we're just going to keep going, generate some under highlights on the hoses using the same color. Just stay busy in the Beats Lab. Now we're going to take some of that dark silver and then we're going to wipe out the overspray, kind of rebuild that frame that holds the 2 canisters that we've taken the liberty to decide are somehow glass, even though they clearly have nuts and bolts and shit in them. So I don't give a fuck. It's hilarious and it's fun. So now let's just drop a couple of under highlights, like go back into the yellow, put a little white in the yellow, create a couple of quick little highlights down there, make it a little bit more aggressive. That helps big time. Same thing, maybe I'll throw a little bit down above the seal here. Maybe I'll run a little bit more moisture into the mix. Do a quick, I like to call this a brute force wet glaze. The paint is very wet and low opacity. Let's send some of that orange right back in there and maybe fuzz out that yellow just to create a little bit more of a intriguing transition. Really fun to do, really kind of easy as long as you stay quick, you keep the paint wet, keep it low opacity, and you can kind of just keep ramping it up, keep dropping more and more highlights in there. See, too easy, honestly. But when you're dropping these tiny little lines when they're being crisp, it's a little bit different, right? So here I'm keeping it a little bit more opaque, try to stay a little bit more in control, a little bit less moisture as I generate a nice crisp red line. And then we're going to try to drop an even brighter line above it. And again, lower moisture, higher opacity. That's how you stay in control of these sharp little lines. Now we're going to get back to the tanks. This is a little fun side quest. Go nuts, make your weapons look cool as you want. I have a saying, don't paint by numbers until you have to. You can do a lot with the airbrush, with tactics, order of operations, but sometimes you do have to paint by numbers and you got to be precise. And this is where you're going to want to be on top of your brush game. It's time to start cutting in some details, guys. So let's wipe out some of that overspray. Let's grab some of that dark silver. Run it kind of medium opaque, somewhat moist, just whatever is easily spreadable. You don't need to worry about opacity too much because you've already got some of that silver in there. And the green that is kind of obscuring it was all deployed with their airbrush, which was very low opacity, comparably. So now we're, instead of painting all this stuff metal and making it super opaque, all we have to do is just kind of scratch and scribble and wetly dry brush and just kind of jam it into a couple spaces. And even if a little green is still kind of tucked into the paint job, it's fine. A little green mixed in with the metal in some places after we throw a wash down or whatever, it's gonna be fine. So we don't have to do nearly as much. We just have to cut a couple of things in, keep it clean, keep it consistent. Try not to get it on the green anywhere, right? Try to keep it a little bit paint by numbers, but we don't have to go too hard, you see? Like, we have to fully paint these tracks because they fully got airbrush, but that's it. Imagine if it was all that way. That's what I'm saying. So we saved a ton of time. It's very clean. They're looking really good. Just a couple more details and you can call them battle ready if you wanted. So we're going to grab some of that silver and we're going to start doing some of our details. I'm just going to pull some of the bright ass silver out. We're going to grab a dry brush. This is an ancient technique right here. I'm using the Army Painter dry brush. I'm going to keep it very dry. Use a paper towel sometimes. And dry brushing is high opacity, low moisture. That's the rule. So the higher the opacity, the lower the moisture, the kind of more you can take your time and you can feather it in. You can obviously use some of the gray area in between, right? Like it could be sort of dry and mostly opaque and you're going to get a different effect. But I'm going very dry here deliberately. And this is really going to help me catch all the crisp angles. A dry brush deployed this way is like a poor man's edge highlight. And it works really good on metal. I don't use it on a lot of things. I use it on metal, like dirt, like sometimes fur, things that are okay if they look a little dry and dusty. But we can really get some bonus detail here. It kind of preserves some of that dark steel. It just hits the edges and it starts to generate some definition, right? We're getting contrast now. The bright angles are much brighter. And there's even different sizes of dry brushes. You can use makeup brushes, but I really do like these Army Painter brushes. It's a good set of 3, really affordable. I use them all the time. And there we go, looking real good, nice and streaky. In some places, I'm not really committed to that perfection here because I'm gonna do more to beat up this stuff. But already, look at that metal. Looks really good, really clean, kind of beat up just a little bit. There's a lot of texture built into the metal because of the sculpt. Easy to find those angles, and even on the smooth areas is not too hard. So now we're going to go back to our crazy ass fake deathless metal mix. This has been featured in all of our deathguard videos, the 101 batch painting video and the Mortarion video. Basically, all you got to know is if you take a dark silver and mix it with something reasonably gold or bronze, basically what you're doing is you're getting like a metallic brown, a kind of a metallic yellow and a metallic gray, and mixing them together and getting this kind of desaturated brown gray. Because when I look at metallic paints, I don't really care about the color. I don't think like gold. I don't put labels on them. I'm going for a vision here. So this is a very dark desaturated metallic brown, basically, by mixing some metallics together. And we're going to go through, catch some of these angles, get the trim. We're using high opacity. A little bit of more moisture than normal just to get the coverage a little bit better. And I'm going to actually mix that same blend I just told you about in the pot now. Right, we got some bronze, which is metallic brown. We got some dark silver, which is metallic gray. We got some copper, which is like metallic orange-ish. You know, we're just going to throw them together. You get this desaturation quality. And there's a color that P3 makes called Deathless Metal. It looks a lot like this, and this is kind of my remix of it when using my Pro Krills. And so we're just going to airbrush these spines real quick. We're going to go on this side quest since we're using that color anyway. And we sub-assembled these because it would have been a hell of a lot harder to airbrush our transitions through the gates on the bottoms of these things and make it look good. So I'm going to just take the extra step, do a couple quick little highlight bursts, throw some of that light bronze in the mix. Just kind of mix it in. Always respect the journey. Don't just go straight to the light bronze. We're going to lower the opacity a little bit. We're not going to go crazy low opacity with metallics. You can be a little bit buster. You can just let it happen. So it just generate a couple of fun little highlights. Nothing to write home about. Just something cool. Create a little bit of definition, little sexiness in the transition game here. Go through, bang them all out. Too easy. Oftentimes when I'm painting models, I'm also really looking for the thing that I can kind of blow your mind with. Something crazy. I like to, invite controversy sometimes, right? Nothing crazy, just like, why would you do that? Well, that doesn't look right. Something to get people looking at my army from a distance and they can really start to appreciate them. As a guy who goes to a lot of tournaments, a lot of conventions, I really want to draw the eye. So I'm always looking for a way to push it. Let's tie in our theme now, guys. On the project, I've been using blues, cyans, magentas, all sorts of different colors to tie my deathguard in. And with these awesome Dozer blades being front and center, people are like, oh, what color are you going to do them? I was like, obviously, I'm going to throw my blues in here. So all I did was just take a little transparent blue, mix it in with some black, and I'm creating a very dark gray. But it's a gray made possible by the introduction of blue, so it's a little bit blue, right? But it's very dark. So we're just going to kind of reset these Dozer blades with this base. And we're going to start generating that kind of cyan narrative like choice. I decided to throw in like Mortarion, pretty much anything that's kind of like corrupted, anything kind of neat. I throw a lot of blue in on my deathguard project. So this is kind of the perfect place, the perfect piece of real estate to throw it in. And it's also kind of weird. It's a strange choice. We're going to throw, now I'm going to throw a little like straight up cyan in there, right? And so we have this dark gray that we're going to progressively make lighter by introducing just a very slight shift with the blue, low opacity, tons of moisture. And we're just going to barely fade it up. And you're going to see a little bit more of an extreme transition here where I'm going to let it be mostly that dark black blue. And I'm just going to let some of this shadow grayish blue kind of creep in. And it's a strange choice, right? I like making strange choices. I like to subvert the expectation, right? I like to do something that people wouldn't expect. People, might say that, the Dozer blade should be totally beat up and totally fucked up. And I'm like, well, I want the model to look awesome, like all the time. From my perspective, I want it to tie into my army. And from like halfway across the room, I want you to see my shit. That's kind of always my driving force. So I'm always looking for strange solutions to this. The cool thing is that like these Dozer blades have all this corruption already built on them. There's like barnacles and pitting in it. Mine are just like demonically infused with that essence. I don't care. Like I have a narrative. I have a theme throughout my army. And when it's all laid out, you see there's blue basically everywhere in my army. And my awesome Plagueburst crawlers have this really great canvas to generate an incredibly crisp, dramatic transition on. And as you see, I'm leaving so much of the black blue intact. I'm making very abrupt, very short highlights as I get brighter and brighter, as I add more of that sky blue to the mix, and maybe even eventually some white. I'm having less and less real estate being basically augmented by it, just keeping it tight. Let's jump right into cutting in some trim, some details, etc. So I'm going to show you yet again how I make this color combination. Just some bronze, dark silver, maybe a little copper. Just kind of swirl them together, make this kind of deathless metal. And let's just use kind of high opacity, just enough moisture to get the paint to transfer. And let's just quickly lock in this trim. This is going to take a little bit more time than I want. Anyone who's ever painted a chaos model knows the struggle, the trim life. So just go through, be careful, paint by numbers. Try not to get this on your fresh airbrush. Try to use hard strokes, straight lines. Try to go with the grain as much as you can. Use light brush pressure, a little bit of moisture when necessary to help spread it. Keep it kind of dry when you're getting close to the edge. Try to identify like safe angles that'll help mitigate getting an errant, fleck of metallic paint on your beautiful paint job. And just stay in motion, stay committed. Keep your eyes on the prize. There you go. So now that we're going to get this like really crisp, clean metal and everything, I'm just going to quickly bully in a quick highlight on these skulls. Just, some random brown from my desktop. Got a little bit of ivory and shit. Just going to just quickly brute force, wet blend a quick transition there. While that's all drying, I'm going to set up and do a quick kind of perimeter edge highlight. These are kind of fun to do. I'm basically going to try to just respect the real estate. I'm using like almost the same black gray from the airbrush step with just a little bit of a highlight in it, using some of that blue still. And I'm just going to just draw some lines using really crisp lines, pulling back straight to my heart, using the tip of the brush, higher opacity, lower moisture. And I'm just going to start building this inner trim wall, right? A lot of chaos models have this, where it's kind of just this weird highlight that exists between the trim and the actual field. It's important to leave like a little spacer though. You don't want to just butt it right up to the trim. You want to make sure there's a little bit of a channel between it. And that's where it gets kind of risky, right? Just want to be kind of precise, take your time. Don't just do pure white. Respect the real estate, right? Just make it a highlight to the colors you're working with. So I'm constantly changing how bright this highlight is using the same colors from the airbrush, just either adding more of the white and blue or more of the black, and just getting a nice respectful line, building it up. It looks really cool. I don't know why it exists, but it just looks cool. Simultaneously now, we can do a highlight on all our metal. So we're going to take that light bronze, kind of mix it in with our ghetto deathless metal, and we're going to just run a quick, really brutish set of highlights on all of the metal. Metal like will really withstand brutishness, and just be a little bit more careful and precise the closer you get to the actual blue field. And now once all that dries, we can use a classic army painter, dark tone. Let's just do it right now. It's dry. Let's get it. Let's do some pen washing. Let's just be a little bit more in control. I don't want to just slather all this flat trim with wash. It's kind of unnecessary and inappropriate. So I'm just going to kind of put it where there are shadows. Going to just kind of wash my nuts. Going to run a quick channel wash up against those blades real quick. You know, maybe I'll use a little water. Maybe I'll use a little flow improver to kind of thin it down when necessary. But I'm just going to kind of make things darker. Make dark things darker, but I don't need to completely wash this. This is kind of big, right? Not everything needs that full-on wash. Just remember that. Now that that's all dry, let's just quickly finish this side quest out. We use magenta in a lot of our deathguard models. It's a big part of the theme. So there's some big boils poking through some of these barnacles. We're going to go through with just some magenta. We're going to kind of highlight these skulls that we brutishly laid down a quick base coat on using just some random ivory. Just kind of cut in some of the details. Kind of just pop them. No big deal. Go a little harder. Make them a little bit more crisp. You know, simple stuff. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that green, we're going to take that blue, and we're going to mix them together. Okay, this is just some sky blue, some bright yellow green. We're going to make our own verdigris, our own kind of like, you know, bronze patina. I'm not a rush scientist or corrosion scientist, but I know it kind of looks like this. So we're going to lower the opacity like a ton. Okay, and we're going to stay in control, maybe pull some of the moisture off, and we're just going to classically add some of this in some places to just generate that cool ass corrosion. Boom, 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 pop, pop, pop. We're not going to go nasty here. We're not going to go crazy. It's low opacity. It's going to just get where we want it to get. It's going to just kind of change that little piece of real estate and kind of give you the effect. We're going into the home stretch. We're looking for things to do to make this model look a little bit better, to make these guys stand out on the table a little bit more, right? We're going battle ready. Time to deploy some weathering oil. A little bit of Mr. Hobby weathering tech, a little bit of Mr. Hobby weathering solvent, little odorless spirits. And what we're going to do is just use a combination of the black, multi-black, that is the earthen brown or brown soil, and some of the orange. And we're going to just kind of lay it on heavy, okay? Just kind of going between some of the browns, some of the blacks. And what we're trying to do is just kind of go hard. Basically let it do what it's going to do. The whole objective here is to get the dark stuff to settle in the recesses to make the dark things darker, but simultaneously create some interesting filters to try to generate some of that weathering effect. Make it look a little dirty, a little beat up. The blacks are going to get deep into the treads. It's going to create a little bit more of a sharp piece of definition. Contrast is all about making the dark things darker and the bright things brighter. We did that with the dry brushing and now with this washing tech, but we're also going to be able to cheat in some weathering, right? Make it look a little used and abused, like some of the environment's doing its thing. Now, the oils are great for this because they have a long work time. You can kind of clean them up. They spread really fast. And they're just kind of easy to work with, honestly. And I like to use a sable brush, a nice sable brush, something that is dedicated now for oils. I use it exclusively for this. I've got a little Red Grass Games brush right here for that. And we're just going to keep going through it. Lay down the oils, just make it look beautiful. It's going to kind of just dry, do its thing. I'm even going to take some and throw it down on all the nuts. Remember, guys, you got to wash those nuts. We're going to use a little brown here, just kind of go through, hit every nut, pop, 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 pop. And you got lots of work time here. So, like, if you make a mistake, don't worry about it. Just keep going. Be deliberate. Lay it down. Just kind of, and I'm just letting my tank just sit there. I'm not holding it in my hand. I'm just letting it do its thing. Try to be precise, okay? This is going to seem like it takes a long time, but it really doesn't, and it's going to give you incredible results. It's going to generate a lot of contrast, a lot of snap on the model. You're giving people what they expect to see. Beautifully done right there. Love it. So now what we're going to do is just throw a little bit, like, just don't be too crazy, but throw a little bit inside some of these cavities. Darken them up, right? They got all these barnacles and things and these slashes and these tears. Just throw it up in there too. Let it do what it's going to do. Make the dark stuff darker. Maybe create a fun little filter around everything. You see how that oil reacts? Looks really good. Now what we're going to do is take some of the odorless spirits and we're going to try to streak some of these nuts. And that's because of the work time. The spirits are going to kind of break it loose and dissolve it. And you can kind of just send it down. If you're just careful with your stroke, you can kind of just pull that rust down. And it looks kind of aggressive, but that's because the odorless spirits is really shiny still. And look at the Plagueburst crawler up on the right. It's drying, and you see how those streaks look totally different than the one I'm working on now. That's just the odorless spirits kind of just evaporating, okay? And look at how awesome, how much more of a realistic weathering streak you can get with such a simple step. So definitely pick up some oils. They're great for this. You can kind of do some fun things. Really bring that weathering low effort as fuck. And our models are pretty much battle ready, right? Like, we threw a sick transition on them. We did some really basic stuff to the metals. And with just a couple of bonus weathering patterns, a little bit of streaking here and there, you got pretty much a battle ready paint job. Right there, there's no edge highlights. There's no extracurricular stuff done to that armor plates. Just clean execution. We didn't forget to paint things. We just painted everything we had in the amount of time that we did, and you can present these on the tabletop, and anyone would be happy to play against this force. Now, of course, we're going to take it to that next level. Stand by. There it is, guys. This is a battle-ready paint job. You can put these 3 Plagueburst crawlers on the table, take them anywhere, and no one will ever talk shit. People will see them as a fully fleshed out and painted set of models. Having said that, we're going to go further, but not here. This YouTube version is free to play. If you want to see the full length video where we take it to that next level, we're going to be using pigments, more weathering techniques, and we're going to make it look even more exciting with maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes of bonus content. Patreon.com, baby. Anyway, I truly appreciate you guys watching my content here, and play on, players. If you like these tutorials, check out Next Level Painting on Patreon. Become a patron of the arts today. We offer early and exclusive access to our videos and a rewards program for different pledge levels. Patreon is PayPal and credit card secure, so you don't have to worry about that. We use 100% of the money to improve our process.